I'd like to bring up Dave Nyberg from Michigan United Conservation Clubs. It doesn't have a position stated here. It has a question mark, and that's probably equivalent to a squirrel trying to cross the road in the middle of traffic. He doesn't know which way you're going, right?
Well, almost, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for the opportunity to provide comments on behalf of Michigan United Conservation Clubs. My name is Dave Nyberg. I'm the Legislative Affairs Manager for that organization. We represent about 45,000 individual members and club members throughout the state. The reason we don't have a state position on this bill is we did have an opportunity to speak briefly with Representative Meadows this morning, and our organization is fully supportive of what he's trying to accomplish with this bill, and that is provide a clear understanding of what the law is for people that want to feed birds in their backyard, but also want to make sure that they're not violating the law and rules promulgated and ordered by the Natural Resources Commission relating to the ban on the feeding and baiting of deer and elk. However, we also had concerns that that this exception that's added is still pretty vague in the light of distinguishing between what is incidental and allowing somebody that would use this exception to find a loophole in the law. And maybe we're digging into the weeds on that, but being an organization that's very frequently getting phone calls and dealing with members that are complaining about or trying themselves to figure out what they can and can't do to feed deer, it's not uncommon to find situations where people are using exceptions in the law, especially exceptions that are freshly drafted and put out to the public. And as I read this, we think about circumstances that we've experienced with people dumping buckets of seed into a bird feeder in their backyard, and when the deer come in every night, nose-to-nose contact to eat on that feed. Maybe they like watching the deer. Everybody likes watching wildlife, and that's understandable. But the purpose of this statute, then, if that type of activity is being conducted under this exception, so they're not in violation, or you're tying the hands of a law enforcement or conservation officer to ticket those folks, you're kind of undermining the purpose of what this statute and the orders issued by the Natural Resources Commission are trying to do, and that's stop the spread of wildlife disease. I don't know. The distinction of how you define that in the law is rather difficult, as everybody has kind of commented on. Deer are gonna find food sources and they're gonna congregate, and I think we all understand that. But there's got to be a distinction between intermittent seeds falling on the ground from a bird feeder and somebody dumping a couple of gallons into a bird bath or something so that deer can come eat that seed easily and congregate around it. I don't know what kind of language you would suggest. I don't know if this could be restricted to residential purposes so people aren't putting a bunch of bird seed in the back 40, or if you can set height restrictions on the bird feeder. Understanding those types of ideas are, unduly placing government in people's lives and making it harder for them to enjoy, normal recreational activity or wildlife watching opportunities. But MUCC does have some concerns about how this exception is drafted, and we'd like to see if it could be tightened up a little bit. At the same time, we wanted to express our support for the intent of the bill and applaud Representative Meadows for trying to provide the general public a more clear idea of what the law is and how they can help and contribute to avoiding the spread of wildlife disease while also feeding birds and enjoying wildlife watching. With that, Mr. Chairman, I realize it's not a very clear position, but would like to would we be available to take questions, or would be able to work with any of you on this bill into the future? Thank you.
Just a comment. Law enforcement officers have to deal with too fast for conditions. That's a judgment call. What we have here is the way I see it is that if they get complaints, they go in and write the ticket regardless of the judgment. That instead of it appears that way. You're shaking your head no, but in this case here, he was clearly feeding deer. I'm clearly feeding deer, or clearly feeding birds rather. I'm clearly feeding birds at my house. Putting the feeder. I already got the feeder up high. The squirrels come in and knock the feed out. So I can shoot the squirrels, but it's against the law to do that. I can turn the dog loose to chase the deer away, but I think it's against the law to do that. Putting it up higher, the birds will knock the seed out too, and the deer come up, and regardless if there's a little bit or how much there are, they come up like along. They trim all the bushes around the house first, usually is what they do, and then they start looking for some more. Representative Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks, Dave. I guess I find it troubling that we're actually having to talk about finding or making a law that permits you to feed birds. I don't think in any time that I was running for the legislature did I ever think that I would sit on a committee talking about or discussing having to make a law regarding feeding birds. And so
And I would agree with you. And maybe I didn't make it abundantly clear. The purpose of the point I was trying to get across is there are bad actors out there, and there are people that are going to do whatever they can with any type of exception to the law to try and if their purpose is to attract deer, when attracting deer with feed is illegal, they will try and find a loophole in the law to try and do that. 99% of the people under this law that feed birds are not going to try and do that, but when I just doing my due diligence for my job with MUCC, understanding that we do have people that are bad actors, and regardless of this law, whether it's enacted or when any other law is enacted, they're going to find ways to get around the law or violate it either way. But because this exception is explicitly drafted in the law, I wanted to suggest that perhaps there is a way of tightening up to make it more clear, and by you giving the example of height restriction and whatever. I mean, I was just spitballing and trying to say that perhaps there is a way to more clearly define the exception, and understanding that deer are going to congregate either way. But using the example of the gentleman that dumps buckets of bird seed into a bird bath for the primary purpose of attracting deer, perhaps he is in violation under this exception. But drawing that distinction, I think is important. I think it makes sense to sit down and talk with law enforcement about their perspective on this more further, and just make sure that we're not creating a vector for bad actors.
Don't you think the time would be better spent when, I drive up north, I live up north, I see gas stations with beets, bags, corn. I've talked to some people that freely advertise deer feed for sale, ask them what their business is doing nowadays. Some of them say most of them say it's down by half. That means that at least half are still out there openly feeding deer, baiting them. Don't you think that with the limited resources we have, that's the place to go instead of going after somebody who is obviously feeding the birds? I think our resources should be better spent, and I'm not I don't agree with the ban. I think the ban, a reasonable approach would have been the ban outside the disease areas that we know. Matter of fact, up in the UP, they're closer to CWD in the wild than we are up in West Branch, and still we have all these restrictions on, but they not only can they feed their deer to keep them from starving to death, they can bait them also. It just doesn't make sense. This legislation tries to make some sense out of enforcement. And I think the representative's doing the best he can to bring clarity here, far more clarity than what was originally intended, I think. So, but I appreciate you coming in and taking a kind of neutral position, whatever.